Aaron, good evening. Another long day at the inquiry, certainly different testimony. Let's talk about some of the key things that came out today.
Well, you touched there on Mzwanele Manyi's critique of the evidence of three witnesses, in fact, Mcebisi Jonas as well as Phumla Williams and Themba Maseko. And he's raised questions about the true facts that are before the Commission of Inquiry, and this after a question from Advocate Maleka on whether or not Manyi agrees that the Guptas have been implicated by testimony and evidence before the inquiry at this point. So let's just take a look at exactly what he said on that front.
I have doubts about the rest of everything else. Mcebisi Jonas, for instance, Mr. Jonas, for instance, he makes a claim that he makes, and the next thing, he's not even clear who actually did this. At the one point, he says it's Mr. A.J. Gupta, then it's not clear, then somebody else. Then I'm not sure if, what is this thing, and so on. And by the way, part of the disturbing thing, Chairperson, which is in the public domain, is that they were in some hotel, and then they drove to Tuzan. I'm saying to myself, why does a deputy minister leave his bodyguards and everybody and drive with this young chap on a car to some place that he said is not even familiar with this place? So all those kinds of things, they just leave you wonder as to what exactly was at play here. So things like that, Chairperson, for me, they just are things that I just don't understand. So I can't vouch for people that have got those kinds of what I think are gaps in their depositions.
One of the things that Jimmy Manyi also had to answer to is how TNA and the whole New Age operation was able to grow its revenues as quickly as it had, given the short amount of time that it had been operating.
Yes, and he actually provided some figures on government advertising for various different media, including broadcast media, the likes of the SABC, ETV, some of the print publications as well. And he provided figures for 2011, 2012, and then 2012, 2013. And there was much toing and froing with Advocate Maleka, as well as the chairperson, Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, on comparing apples and apples and oranges, really. Can you compare the financing or the advertising revenue to the SABC, which is quite diverse in terms of its different platforms, with that of a newspaper, for example. And I must say that Advocate Maleka seemed really frustrated at times during Manyi's testimony, which at first was really just him going through his statement, not laid in evidence so much as kind of leading himself through the various topics. And Kathy, I also found it interesting that in his critique of some of the evidence before the inquiry so far, he didn't mention Fakey Mentor, because we know that Mentor has issued a letter to the inquiry asking to have her information about a particular person who she initially said was with Duduzane Zuma removed, and that she incorrectly named Fana Hlongwane as having been on a plane and introducing himself to her between Dubai and China. So interesting that that didn't come up as someone he's questioning over their evidence before the inquiry. But we're certainly going to hear more from Manyi on government advertising, whether you're comparing apples and oranges or apples and apples tomorrow.
And of course, that's when Jimmy Manyi will continue giving his evidence, because they cut it short after quite a long day. Let's go back to earlier on in the day than Aaron, former Treasury Communications head. How does she fit into all of this?
So what's crucial about Matkanda's evidence is that she came as the third of three Treasury officials and really corroborated a lot of what we'd heard last week, specifically around Mohammed Bobat and his behavior, his conduct when he arrived along with Des van Rooyen. She made some startling allegations about the attitude of Bobat, his behavior toward her, as well as Van Rooyen, and the fact that she claims he was calling the shots before Van Rooyen had even been sworn in as minister. And that corroborates some of the testimony we heard last week from two other Treasury officials, the current and former DG. But let's just have a look at some of what she had to say this morning at the inquiry.
The man of the DG was quite angry, I thought. And this was surprising to me because he's a very even-tempered man. I had got to know him as a very sober and even-tempered person. But in that meeting, he was quite angry. In fact, he was pointing his fingers towards the minister and his advisor and his advisors. And he then went around the room, introducing each and every person that was in the meeting and explaining what their role in the Treasury was. And then he said, he pointed his finger and said, "Here we do everything by the book. If I say to you, no, it's not going to be done, it's not because I don't like your face. It is because it is not right by regulations. If it is not according to the book," and the book that he was referring to was the minister's handbook. He said, "If it is not according to the book, it is not going to be done."
So, Kathy, that's specifically in relation to this first staff meeting that happened on the Friday. I'd incorrectly said before on air it was the Saturday. It was the Friday in the week that Van Rooyen was appointed finance minister and pitched up with Mohammed Bobat and Ian Whiteley as well as these two so-called advisors, although it seems that they weren't properly appointed and lawfully appointed to those positions. And what's interesting is that Maqanda also said in response to a question from the Deputy Chief Justice around his behavior, where did he draw his power from? Maleka asked the same question. I think it was Philip Mokoena who asked the question. Where did it come from, this authority that Bobat seemed to be wielding? And she said she doesn't know where it came from, but from the first 2 minutes that she met him, he asserted his authority, he asserted his control, and it was almost as though he was calling the shots with Van Rooyen just as the face of things, as the official minister, but Bobat really pulling the strings from behind the scenes.
All right, Erin, and tomorrow we have Jimmy Manyi. Is Gwede Mantashe still going to be on?
Well, that is the question in chief at the moment, Kathy. Advocate Maleka was wary about estimating how long the continued questioning of Manyi will take tomorrow. He wasn't confident on waging a guess as to whether or not we will hear from Gwede Mantashe as planned. But I understand from speaking to some of the people with the inquiries team that they anticipate they should be done by the afternoon.
All right, let's leave it there for tonight. Erin Bates was watching the State Capture Commission of Inquiry.